Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving. Today, we have a remarkable guest, Dr. Abby Kirigin. She is the Executive Director of REAL, a nonprofit dedicated to twice exceptional student success. She has created a strength-based career awareness curriculum for 2E students. Before we continue, Dr. Abby, please share more about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'll tell you, I was working here in the Bay Area for many years in software design, and I was an interaction designer at a number of startups. And then I had my own children, and I started getting interested in education. And I decided to go back to school and pursue a doctorate degree in cognitive diversity and education, which I just completed in June of 2024. And as you mentioned, my focus was on a strength-based career awareness program for middle school students.
That's cool. So I want to start off by learning more about you. What inspired you to be on the journey of strength-based learning?
So, as I alluded to in my previous answer, as I was working as a designer and working in tech, I did have three children. My first child was very advanced and always, school was relatively easy for him, and so that was pretty straightforward. Then my second child came along, and he was a lot more complex, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And I had a child who was very articulate and seemed very bright, was really interested in books, and at the same time really struggled to make progress reading and was showing a lot of signs of anxiety. And so I just couldn't figure out what was going on. And one of his teachers told my husband and I that he might be dyslexic. And so we had him tested. And when we had him tested, we also learned that he was twice exceptional. And that it was a term that we were not familiar with at the time, which actually meant that he had a lot of really incredible strengths and gifts and abilities. And at the same time, he was dyslexic and did have ADHD as well. And so it was just a really interesting point in time because we didn't feel that there were any school programs that really could support him in the way he needed to learn. He both needed academic acceleration, advanced concepts. He loved diving into all sorts of topics about engineering and science and fantasy, and yet at the same time was really held back by his abilities to read. And so needing both of these things at the same time was something a lot of schools weren't able to support. So around that time, I decided to leave my job and start doing some more work, learning about education, learning about twice exceptional students, learning about neurodiversity, which ultimately led me on this path to go back to school and start to learn better what are all the best practices for teaching children like this and sharing that with the world. And so now I am the executive director of REAL, which is a local nonprofit in the Bay Area. We focus mostly on San Mateo and Santa Clara County, and we work with educators and we put on a lot of events. In fact, we were at one this morning where we do workshops working with the teachers to help understand these students, build some empathy and awareness around their experience, and also understand how to best support them realize their potential in the classroom. And we also have a number of parent offerings, so events for parents to attend, speaker series, support groups, one-on-one meetings, all sorts of ways that the parents can find community, can support one another, can learn from experts, and find ways also to better support their students' journeys in K-12 schools in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I like how since you couldn't find resources for your children, you're helping other families get resources.
Yes.
So, how do you define strength-based learning and why is it important?
So one of the things that I think is so common in schools And it makes sense why it's been set up this way, but it's a bit of a deficit focused lens. So schools are often looking at what children can't do, where are the gaps and the holes, and figuring out ways they can fill that in. And of course, that's very important. But I think that one of the things that gets lost when there's such a focus on where people are not meeting grade level standards or where they may be challenged or struggling, there's really a lack of looking at the opposite side, the strength based lens, the thinking about what's great about this student, what do they bring to the classroom, how can we maximize those, nurture those things so that they can bring all of those wonderful things that they contribute to the classroom, to their society, to bear in school. And unfortunately, I think there's just not been as much focus on that. And yet, that kind of strength based learning, strength based education is so critical for students to be successful. I think when we step back a moment and think about what all human beings deserve, we think about um, what do you love to do? What do any of us love to do? And the fact that we are adults, often, hopefully, we get to do that every day. And I think we should really extend that to all people, including our students and including kids in our classrooms. That students and as all of us should get to do something that they love every day. They should know what that is. They should have an opportunity to nurture it. They should get to spend time doing it. And so many reasons of that. I mean, it's a little bit intuitive, but it's sort of like it makes us feel good. It fills our buckets. It makes us realize that we are good at things. There are things we love to do. And when challenges inevitably come, maybe in other areas or related to some of those strengths, we're able to use those feelings of resilience and pride, self-concept, self-confidence, and then we're able to use those again to work through some of the things that we may struggle with as well. So it's just such a critical piece and of what we all deserve as humans. And I think that more of education should acknowledge and focus and nurture those strengths in all of our students.
Yeah, so you mentioned that people normally just look at the faults and like their weaknesses in people, but no one actually looks at what you do good. So the strength-based approach looks at what you are strong in, and then you like tell kids to do that so they actually feel more confident. And then you mentioned that you use that to help you in what you struggle with. So I just wanted to ask you, how can we use our strengths to like do something that we struggle in? Like if we are doing really good in like math, then how do we use that to help us in like English or history class?
Yeah, it's a good question. In some ways, there are some really direct ways to nurture or to weave in strengths and interests into challenge areas. So one of the things that about a strength-based education, first of all, is to kind of make a clear distinction between our strengths, which, like you mentioned, might be an academic subject, but might also be a character strength like integrity, curiosity, honesty, bravery, etc. But there's also the idea of interest. So there may be topics that interest students more than others. So there may be some students who are really, really interested in um, sharks, or maybe in physics, engineering, or maybe they have a particular passion for animals. And so there are ways we can integrate those things as well. So just to give some examples, if you have a student who is struggling with writing, you may be expand your conception of what's allowed for an assignment by allowing them to bring in their areas of interest into those topics. So maybe they write about sharks or animals, or we expand some of those things in your example of math versus English. Perhaps there's a way to weave in a student's interest in math into some of the English assignments. For instance, maybe there's a way to look at analytical characteristics of a particular character in a novel, let's say. And then the student might be more willing to do some of that writing and to take more care in what they produce if it's on a topic that really interests them, like examining some of those mathematical elements in a novel or making those connections in that way. Another example might be for a younger student who's struggling to read, to help them do read texts that are in their areas of interest. So rather than maybe working on more generic reading assignments, that we weave in some of their interests into that work as we're working on their reading.
Oh, okay. So you said that you weave in the strengths in the challenge areas because then they're more willing to actually learn, and then it's just kind of merged in. So I liked that. And then how can I identify my strengths and how can I identify others' strengths too?
It's a great question. There are a lot of really practical tools you can use. So some folks really like to have maybe forms they can fill out or quizzes. There's a number of ones available online. And we do have at Real, we keep a repository list of all of the links to these different types of tools. There's some that help analyze individuals' character strengths, as I mentioned. There are others that talk about academic areas of interest and help uncover that. There are some that talk about styles in which someone prefers to do work. So some folks may prefer to create podcasts or make artworks, or they may prefer to do deep dives of writing, or they may prefer to make a script and act something out. So there are all these different ways to kind of tease apart what a student's interests and strengths may be. I would say more generally, for parents, I often suggest leaving a variety of things out in their house and just sort of observe where the child gravitates towards. So there may be an area in your house that has cardboard and scissors, and there may be another area that has a number of drawing books, or another area that's got some books on paper airplanes with some paper for folding. And you could put out a number of variety of different things and see where your child goes to, what interests them, what excites them. You can also ask. You can ask the child directly. You can ask the student, you can ask, excuse me, the classroom teacher, where does the child go during a free time? What seems to get them excited? I think that one thing we talk a lot about in the strength-based realm is sort of what brings the light to the child's eyes, to the student's eyes, what kind of seems to animate them and light them up in a way that brings energy and refills their battery. And that's something that you want to help nurture and, again, find meaningful ways to incorporate it into what they're doing both at school and at home.
Yeah, I like the part where you say that what brings light to their eyes, and then what does you like nurture it. And then you mentioned there's a lot of ways to find people's strengths. So if you're a parent, then you can those are a lot of ways. But if you're trying to find someone like a friend, you could also like use those, like observe what they like, what they talk about, and like their activities, and that's a lot to figure out what they enjoy.
Yeah, great point. I think it's really interesting to think about, and I think something that we haven't explored as much, so it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, is how friends can use some of these strategies. At Real, we talk a lot about how adults can use them, right? How teachers can use them, how parents can use them. And we ask you to talk to the children directly, but we don't talk a lot about what other friends could do to draw those things out. And I think that's a really neat idea. I really like that.
Thank you. So, how can we use our strengths to be more productive?
I think we talked about this a little bit, but what I think the most way you can, use them is to try to find ways you can meaningfully merge the things that do interest you and the strengths that you do have into the things that are being asked of you, right? And what you're being assigned to do. And hopefully your teachers will provide some of those options, but if they don't, I think it is great to see students who are interested and willing to self-advocate and ask for some of those changes. So for instance, if you have an assignment about, for example, I know a student who had an assignment to write an essay on a particular novel in English class, but he wasn't a real lover of long essays, but one of the things that really interested him in the book was about the transportation modes that the characters used in the novel. So sometimes they rode on subways and sometimes they took trains, and trains and subways is a particular interest and passion of this student. So he went to the teacher and asked if he could write his essay, rather than about the main characters, actually about the uses of transportation in the story and what it might signify. And the teacher was really willing, when he was able to self-advocate, to consider those changes and to let him write on that topic. And in that way, he was able to write a much stronger essay, because he was able to use those strengths and interests and be more flexible.
Yeah, that's a good example. I like that. I've noticed all of our teachers are also very adaptable and flexible for their assignments. So that's good. And you said that to be more productive or do what they actually want, then you just meaningfully merge the strengths and what you actually need to do, and then you're more likely to do it in a fun way.
Yes. Another example I talk about a lot is not everything can be done during school all the time. So it is great to think about things that you can do outside of school to support your strengths and interests. And again, when you're able to do those things, I do think they help you become more productive just generally in other ways, because again, you get a lot of positive things from getting to work in areas of strength and interest. So one of the things I've done at home is to make sure that everyone in our house has some goals of an interest that they've lined out of that they're interested in, and then we make sure that each person has some ideas or plans on things that they can do to further those interests and strengths. So it might be for some of my kids or even my husband, an independent project, right, where they know they want to write more. For instance, my husband, so maybe he'll make a plan that he wants to write a little bit every day and keep track of that. And then for one of my other children, I presented them a number of different types of things that they could do after school, maybe an independent study on something, maybe they take a class online, maybe they go somewhere and do something in person. And they can choose from those different things and find something that really interests them and excites them. And then we all share that. And I think going back to what you were talking about among your friends, I think as all of you share with one another about your strengths and interests and say, these are things I'm doing, maybe I'm doing them after school or outside of school, but these are things I really love, um, it kind of normalizes that feeling, right? That all of us have these different things that we're great at, that we're interested in, that excite us. And we take care of them sometimes in school and sometimes out of school, but it's neat to share.
Yeah, so I liked the part where you make a plan on how to further your interest, and I will definitely try that after this. So next, I wanted to ask, is it possible to be able to use a strength in one area of my life but not in the other? So for example, being able to manage my time at school but not in my extracurriculars.
I think that's very true. I think context definitely matters. So it might be that at school there's some other scaffolding set up or some other situation that is allowing you to be more successful managing your time, and perhaps in your extracurriculars you're in such a state of flow, like you're so engaged with these things and you're so consumed with the idea of actually producing or creating or being or experiencing the thing that you really love, that it's harder to pay attention to timing or deadlines or that kind of management, which is a little bit more of a metacognition around what you're working on. And so I think that could definitely happen. And maybe the what I would suggest is being, the first step is being aware of that, and then trying to put in some of your own scaffolding that might work, that might pull some strategies that were working in other contexts, and try to remind yourself to use them when you're in those places where it's more challenging.
So you said first be aware that that's happening and then try the strategies and see what works. And it might be different. Maybe in school you'd use a different strategy, outside use a different. I've noticed I do that too. I use different strategies for school and outside. So as you wrap up, what advice do you have for your younger self?
I think this is a really great question. I was thinking about it a little bit. I was thinking about my own younger self and also my children, especially when they were younger, and things I think that are so important to remember, especially for our neurodivergent students, is that there's nothing wrong or bad or anything like that about being a little bit different. In fact, all of us are different. There's really no conception of normal, and even if there were, there's really no benefit. In fact, it's a wonderful thing to be neurodivergent, because it means there's just so much more opportunities for you to learn some of the most important skills, things like perseverance, things like grit, things like overcoming some challenges. And then you have so many incredible strengths and passions and interests that you can then develop and further. And with all of those skills that you've gained, really go far. And so I think that some of those things are things I always like to tell both myself, and my younger children, to say, be yourself, find your passions, find what you love to do. The road may be more challenging in some times, but those things are going to make you stronger and more successful. And um, everyone can accomplish their dreams, especially those of us who have really big ones. And I think that that's just a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, I agree. Even Albert Einstein was too. Yeah, I read this book once, and it said that part of his brain didn't even work, but the part that did work was twice the size of a
Yes.
normal human's brain. So that was
And
really cool.
Another thing I guess is a great point to bring up about that, and when you mentioned Albert Einstein, it reminds me because I think he had folks who did a lot of his scribing for him. So he talked all about all his ideas all the time. It was really brilliant and really fast paced. He didn't want to sit down and write it all out, but he had other folks who could do that, scribing for him and writing that stuff down. And I think that's another beautiful thing. As you get older, you realize and you have more opportunities that you'll be able to find a niche that fits all of your strengths, all of your interests, all of your personality, that maximizes those things that you're great at, and you'll find ways that you don't need to do or don't need to do as much those things that you don't enjoy doing. Of course, we all have to sort of be exposed to all of these things, but I think that's the lovely thing about careers. There are many different ones. There are many different opportunities. And everyone can find that thing that maximizes those things they're passionate about.
Yeah, I didn't know that fact about Albert Einstein. So today we talked about a lot. We talked about the strength-based approach, and that strengths can be academic topics or qualities. And then we said that you can weave in strengths into challenge areas, or you could like meaningfully merge the strengths and what you do to find more motivation to do it. And then one way to further your interests is to make a plan on like, I enjoy nutrition, so I'll do this, or I'll like teach these people, something like that. So you're also increasing your interest. So my last question for you is, how can our audience learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, we have so much information and so many resources on our website, which is www.real2e.org. You can go to the 2E topics page. We've got so many resources on how to support strengths and interests, how to evaluate an environment to see if it's neurodiversity friendly, how to speak with teachers, how to manage anxiety. We've got a whole section written by twice exceptional students, so their own voices and their own stories. I think that's a great place to hear a lot of inspiring stuff. So, and you can always reach out to us at hello@real2e.org if you would like to learn more.
I'll check the articles on the written by the youth. I didn't know that part. So thank you so much, Dr. Abby, for taking your time out today to share with us how we can utilize our strengths to be more productive and do things we enjoy. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope our audience did too.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every month, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we thank you so much for listening.